If you haven't been living under a rock, then you've probably already heard the scrutiny that the singer David is currently in. Right now, as we speak, and as you're watching this video, his lyrics are currently being dissected in the court of public opinion, and if he's not careful, could soon be used in the court of law. Yikes. This is kind of similar to what happened with Young Thug, and also what's going on with Melly and Lil Durk and Pooh Shiesty and also Take K and a slew of other artists that you've probably heard over the years. But the key question here is, should lyrics be used against artists? Well, that's why in this video, I'm hoping to give you some information that could give you cause to pause and determine how you feel one way or the other. By the way, guys, my name is Uche and I make videos like this every single week, or at least I'm planning to. So if you like what you see and you want to see me grow, hit that like button. If you want to see me go far and reach 1,000 subscribers, man, hit that subscribe button. Now let's get into this. Okay, first of all, let's take a pause, and I have to be real with you guys. This video is not a indictment on David or any of these guys. I'm not here to judge innocence or guilt. It's more just to analyze the lyrics and how it could potentially be used in a court of law at the end of the day. So if you guys are not aware, David, also spelled D4VD. I don't know how you spell David with that, but anywho, he is sort of under a bit of scrutiny. Nah, let me not exaggerate, because this is a very serious topic. There was a body found in his Tesla, which a lot of people are tying back to him because it was his actual vehicle. That being said, people who were not familiar with him, and by the way, that includes me, went back and started digging and saw, oh man, this dude has a select few of songs, really damn near his whole catalog, which have a lot of dark undertones, dark meanings, damn near demonic stuff, like real talk. And that's probably most evident on his most popular song called Romantic Homicide. He also has a ton of cringy and dark lyrics on Dirty Secret, also more on More Than Just Friends. There's another song called Decide and another song called Bleed Out. Again, I'm not spending too much time on the lyrics of this because we're talking about a lot of nasty underage activity potentially. So if you guys want to do your due diligence, go type on YouTube David's name and go read the lyrics for yourself, or go on Genius, wherever the hell you read lyrics. It's out there, guys. And so this is a really big issue, right? For many reasons. Number one, there's a ton of breadcrumbs all throughout his music. Secondly, this really sparks a huge topic in the online community, and it's really, we could argue, at the forefront of what the problem is with social media. Now, if the reports are true, which who the hell knows, David met this young girl on his Discord server, and she was 12 years old and he was 17. And again, long story short, I'm not going to cover too much of the nastiness. Y'all do what y'all do. But for me, I think that the topic of how to create safeguards and make social media safe is probably as relevant as it's ever been. Because if the stories are true, how the hell are these guys finding underage people to interact with? But I do think in the age of social media and technology, there should be more safeguards put on kids to not allow them to interact with people who are damn near legal or overly legal at this point. And so that's one case study. We can also move on to Young Thug. Again, Young Thug was involved in the YSL RICO trial, which ultimately showed him being able to take a plea deal, which was a 15-year plea deal. But if you guys are not familiar, he did have a ton of lyrics thrown into the trial, which was part of the indictment, and it was also used by the prosecution to try to indict him for crimes that they alleged he committed. So there's a song called Bad Boy that he had featuring on the Juice WRLD track, and he had a lyric that said, I shot at his mommy, now he no longer mentioned me. Now, the backstory behind that is he had a feud with YFN Lucci, and these guys were going back and forth on social media, and ultimately those lyrics came up in court. He had another lyric that said, I rep my life for real, for slimes you know I kill. Now, actually, to be fair, that was his homeboy Yak Gotti, and that was from the song Take It to Trial, which was on Slime Language 2. All in all, these are key examples that were used in that YSL RICO trial that could have cost these guys a ton of time behind bars. Luckily, they were able to escape it through the grace of God. Listen, I don't know. These guys did what they did. I'm not here to judge. I'm just here to assess the music. Also, YNW Melly. Remember that guy? Yo, it's been so long since we've had a song from him. He was at one point one of my favorite new artists back in like 2018. Man, he had a song with Kanye West that was super viral at the time. But same thing, man. He's been on trial for quite some time. Actually, his first trial ended in a mistrial. And so he's about to enter into his second trial. And the prosecution is trying to use lyrics from from his Murder on My Mind song, which was a very graphic song and video. But when you dug into the details, that video and song released multiple years prior to the alleged crime that they're saying he committed. There's some key lyrics in that song as well that came out. For example, I didn't even mean to shoot him. He just caught me by surprise, right? Very vague, but somehow they're trying to tie the murders to him based on those lyrics. He also had another line where he said, I woke up in the morning, I got murder on my mind, which was part of the hook. But again, these are super vague, but when you're somebody like YNW Melly who's gotten yourself involved in a potential double homicide that you could go down for, these legal folks are using every avenue to try to weaponize his lyrics against him. Now, Lil Durk is another one who is going through his own murder for hire case, and I guess hope he gets out if he's not guilty, but hey, if he is guilty, that's a whole different story. But even him, he went through the same thing. There's a song he had with Babyface Ray, it's called Wonderful Wayne and Jackie Boy, and they tried to get him on the lyrics where he said, told me they got an addy, got the location, green light, go, 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 look on the news at your son, you screaming no. So that was a very, very huge situation where Durk's legal team had to get him out of a jam, and they were ultimately able to prove that that was a fan-created song that maybe wasn't the most lyrical endeavor that Durk has ever put out, but technically that song was made by fans and it was not actually done in that order by Durk, because that song came out years before the killing of Quando Rondo's cousin. So again, you're seeing lyrics being weaponized against these rappers, and it's a tough call because in a genre that brags about committing crimes and doing all these different things, it's almost like the chickens are coming home to roost with these rappers. But we'll see what happens with some of these cases ultimately. All right, now for some of you guys wondering, man, it can't just be these new rappers and new artists that are getting caught up or have gotten caught up or have gotten scrutinized for the lyrics, right? This has to have happened in the past. Well, like OG Mako used to say back in the day, bitch, you guessed it, right? Now, there's some historical context and legal precedents that's been set for quite some time as it relates to lyrics being used in court. And I take you guys back, right? Back in 2008, there's an up-and-coming artist named Vontae Skinner who had a song that dropped years before a crime that he was ultimately booked and taken in for was committed, that was used against him and used to convict him in court. This was a murder trial, right? And ultimately there was a Supreme Court ruling in New Jersey that overturned that decision. So really crazy stuff. It took the Supreme Court to ultimately say, all right guys, like this song came out years before this murder, so it couldn't have been him. Think about that. Next, we got another instance which happened back in 2001. There was a rapper named McKinney, also known as Mac Phipps Jr., right, who had his lyrics used against him as well in a murder trial, and it was also used to convict him for 21 years. He actually served 21 years in prison, guys. There's also some speculation as to whether or not he was released or not. I've seen some facts, quote unquote facts on both sides saying that the decision was overturned or not, but I don't know. If you guys are familiar, y'all drop your thoughts in the comments, but absolutely, he served time for this crime, whether he committed it or not. He can't get that time back, and that's super unfortunate. I take you guys back even further. In 1985, the rock group named Judas Priest had a ton of scrutiny put on them for a song that they dropped called Better By You, Better Than Me, which saw many families joining together suing them for the suicide that kids had been doing to their song. Now, under most people's brain and circumstance, they'll be like, okay, like what does a song dropping have to do with somebody else taking their life? I think logically you would be right to say, well, that doesn't make any sense, right? Well, if you believe it didn't make sense, well, so did the court system. They ended up dismissing that because it would have set legal precedents in a way that would have been super dangerous for people to start using other people's songs for crimes that folks are committing. So again, that's another example. And I think ultimately one of the biggest problems that the court system has when it comes to like reviewing music is distinguishing fictional accounts or conceptual stories versus reality. And I think some of those biggest cases that I'm familiar with, or at least ones that came to mind before I came up with this topic, I said, man, like what are some songs that really could have been misinterpreted but never really was, right? Think about Eminem's song Stand, right? Which clearly, if you're familiar with that song, it told a theoretical story of a guy who was a super fan named Stan who ended up killing his girlfriend and then actually killing both of them because he was an obsessed fan. Well, it's funny how I never heard anybody questioning Eminem to say, yo, let's go investigate who Stan was. Like, let's go see see if Stan is a real person so we can put a case on Eminem. Like, nobody ever said that, right? Or how about Michael Jackson's song Smooth Criminal, right? Now, who the hell thinks Michael Jackson did anything wrong in his music? I think you would be hard-pressed to find one person on this planet. My homeboy thinks Thriller is the greatest album of all time. And he might be right about that, by the way. But on Smooth Criminal, Michael Jackson was singing about Annie, whether she was okay because she was assaulted and she was abused by this person who was a smooth criminal. Like, now, again, he was singing and his song sounded beautiful and he was dancing his ass off and his Jerry curl was sweating and all type of stuff was happening in that video and in the song, and everybody was jamming and taking all type of drugs in the song. But you know what never happened? Someone asked, yo, who was Annie? Let's go investigate if Annie is a real person. Nobody ever said that, right? Or probably the one that hits the mark for me is Bob Marley's famous song called I Shot the Sheriff. Now, I find it very interesting that, first and foremost, Bob Marley is a legend. Let's give it up for him. But in the song, he quite literally talks about shooting the sheriff, but he didn't shoot the deputy, okay? Now, if somebody wanted to use those lyrics against Bob Marley for a sheriff that died in his community, they probably could. But guess what they didn't do? You guessed it. They didn't use it against him. You know why? Because it was viewed as art, right? And so I bring you guys to this defining question that I've been thinking here on with this topic, and it's more like, why is hip hop treated any differently? Why are black artists who rap specifically treated any differently? And I mind you, two of these examples that I just gave you include black artists. So I personally don't want to make this a racial thing. It's more about a genre difference. When rappers are singing or when rappers are putting things in the most hieroglyphic perspective way who's not named Eminem, it's sort of viewed as not art in a sense, and it kind of leads the law to use it as some sort of literal confession, which I think is wrong and is dangerous when you're evaluating art. Now, with all of that being said, I will say artists have a dilemma and they have a few decisions to make when they're putting out music, right? I think we're in an era now where these lyrics, these conversations are happening much more than I think often. They've upped the scrutiny and the indictments in the court of public opinion. Lyrics have become a genuine tool that is being used against the artist, and I think they have a core set of dilemmas. Number one, I think they gotta protect their art legally, right? I mean, obviously, if you're publishing art, copyright law is in effect for sure, but technically, when the art is copywritten, it kind of opens the door for admissibility as evidence in a sense, right? And I think dilemma number two comes into play where it's almost like a double-edged sword almost to be an artist, because some of our favorite artists are the most vulnerable, right? We love the vulnerability of a Rod Wave, or we even love the vulnerability that NBA YoungBoy brings to the table. And so I can go on and on about some of my favorite personal artists, and if you guys have some of your favorite artists, drop them in the comments below. But I think some of the best artists are the most vulnerable, and with that vulnerability comes disclosure of information about themselves. And so if the artist is not smart, they may actually divulge names and locations and dates and all type of specific information that could possibly come back to haunt them if they're not careful. And that's if they have nothing to do with a crime in general. These lyrics might actually just be weaponized against them in the first place. And so that's a real dilemma that I think artists are facing these days, and they probably always have faced, but I think the conversation is becoming much, much louder these days. And lastly, you might ask, okay, if lyrics are being used against the artist, well, what's actually being done to protect the artist? Well, hey, you came to the right place. Well, first and foremost, if we're talking about rap music, there's currently a bill on the table in Congress called Restoring Artistic Protection Act, and it's called the Rap Act. And it's a federal bill which essentially aims to limit the use of lyrics as evidence in court, right? And so you have support from organizations like PEN America and also Black Music Action Coalition, who are simply advocating for this type of legislation to be in effect to protect artists around the world, not just who make rap music, but also who make art as a whole. Because let's be honest, I think rap music is probably the most vulnerable in this, because I've made the argument earlier that it almost seems like people as a whole don't take rap music as a figment of art or some sort of sector of high art like they do other genres. But yeah, there's some organizations currently in place that are trying to make it possible for artists to get their lyrics protected and not have it used against them in court. But at the end of the day, this is not gonna stop, I think, the ethical conversation that's in play, because once lyrics do make it into a courtroom, the prosecution or the people on the government side is always going to sort of use the lyrics to prove motive or prove the intent of a crime or prove that an artist had prior knowledge of something something that took place in advance of the crime and hence this is why they did it. Oh, they made a confession and blah, 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 right? That's always gonna be the argument that the prosecution is gonna make. Whereas the defense team of the artist or the person who's having their lyrics used against them probably argue that, hey, this is art. My client is portraying a persona, or they're a black artist. Of course, I think it's smart for the lawyer or the attorney to argue some sort of racial bias or there to be some unfair prejudice being put on the artist, which I think is hella fair. And I'm not talking about the artists that are actually out here committing crimes. I'm talking about the ones that are not committing crimes. But even for the ones that are committing crimes and ratting on themselves in their music, I will say I do still think there is a way that their art should be protected over these hard-ass 808 beats and these fire-ass productions that we are all accustomed to enjoying. But what do you guys think? Should lyrics be used in court against an artist and also in the court of public opinion? Or should lyrics be off limits and artists maybe you feel should be allowed to express themselves as freely as they so choose? Y'all let me know your thoughts in the comments. Again, my name is Uche. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.